Welcome back to Over Here. My name is Nick Finzer, and today we're talking with a fantastic drummer and percussionist and UNT alum, that's University of North Texas, a California native, Connor Kent, who just recently moved to New York to pursue his dreams of becoming a jazz drummer here, and he's doing some great work so far in the short 7 months of being in town. Today we had the chance to sit down and have a conversation over Skype, and I'm really excited to share it with you. He's part of a trio called Paragon with Emiliano Lisansky and Dan Dickinson, two other young musicians here in town, and their record Kin is coming out on Outside in Music, and it's open for pre-order now, so find the links to all that stuff in the description below and also here on the screen. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into this conversation because it was pretty interesting and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. All right, today on the show we have a great drummer, Connor Kent, and his group Paragon has an album coming out in a couple of months. And so thanks for being here today, Connor. We are looking forward to not only the record, but talking with you today. So why don't you give people a little bit of background about who you are, where you're from, and how you got into playing drums?
Yeah, so my name's Connor Kent. I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County, just below LA. I was there until I was 18, and then I moved to Denton, Texas, where I attended the University of North Texas. Did my undergrad there, graduated in 4 years, and then I stayed in the Dallas area for another couple years, saving up money to move to New York. So that's where I am now. I've been here since the middle of July. I started playing drums because my dad plays drums, not as a professional musician, but as a hobbyist. So I kind of was always, it's like the classic, like playing on pots and pans, and there's pictures of me sitting on my dad's lap playing drums. So it's that kind of, almost cliche story, but that's how it started for me.
So was your dad or mom or anyone in your family musical, or was that something that you kind of found on your own?
Well, I feel like my family is all on both sides. They're musical kind of underneath the layer, like they're not musicians and they would never ever, try to be musicians necessarily, but they all appreciate good music and they all have like surprisingly good taste in music. I feel like sometimes you find out later when you grow up that your parents maybe didn't have a great sense of music or a great taste in music. And I kind of was like, oh, my parents listen to old people music. And then as I grew up, I was like, oh, actually they listen to great music. And I just wasn't ready for it. So none of them are musicians, but they all have great musical taste at least.
Sure. And so you went to UNT in Denton. What drew you there? And because, you were already kind of near to LA. What kind of moved you to the middle of the country?
Yeah, I get that a lot because people that don't know, people that aren't musicians especially are like, why would you move to Texas after being California? And it was a little bit of a culture shock, but I really, studying with Ed Sopoff, is a drum professor, or was the drum professor at UNT, he just retired last year, was really what brought me there. And also especially as a high schooler, the flash of the 1 o'clock lab band,
Sure.
Is like very appealing. And I had some friends that were a year older than me that I went to high school with who had gone to the University of North Texas. And so they had, when I was a junior, they were doing their auditions there as seniors and telling me all the great stories about it. And then there's specifically a drummer who lives in New York also. His name is Nolan Bird. We went to high school and UNT together, but he told me specifically like Ed Sopoff is like the real deal. And after studying with him for a year, he couldn't recommend it enough. And, I heard some stories about some other schools, and I had started auditioning at other schools, but then I kind of realized that UNT, I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, sort of in a dumb way, but it worked out. So I went there really to study with Ed Sopoff.
Awesome. So what were like the specific, if there is anything specific, or what is it that Ed Sopoff brings to the table that none of the other teachers could?
Well, for me, you can look at his students. He's one of the, I feel like might be one of the last of that generation of players that really did the New York thing when they were young. Like he was in New York in the 70s. He did the touring big band thing in the 60s when he was in his 20s. And, he did like what most students wish they could do now, to really experience that like sort of, those golden decades of, he was on the very end of that, of jazz as far as like, having a living playing like only jazz. So he did that, and then he like switched gears and like really focused on being a professor. So he was very much like an educator, not just a player who taught some lessons.
Sure.
So he really like, if you look at his students, one thing that's consistent with all of them is that he helps you find your thing. You know what I mean? He identifies who you are and then helps you achieve the maximum version of that. So he has students that are like Keith Carlock that sound totally different than students that are like Ari Honig, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he taught like Dave Weckl in his like formative years. He's taught the drummer for like Marilyn Manson and for Rascal Flatts. You know what I mean? So he doesn't teach you how to play like, here's how to play like Ed Sopoff, the jazz drummer. He teaches you how to be the most musical version of yourself. So that's what was super appealing to me, because I really love playing jazz and I really love this music, but there's other things that interest me just as much. And I knew studying with him wouldn't be like, here's how to be a bebop Nazi. You know, it would be like, how do you want to play, and let's achieve the best version of that.
Awesome. So then what drew you to New York? Was there a certain experience or some certain music or people that drew you here?
I mean, it's kind of an overall thing, just in the same way that sometimes people don't like pick, you know, like, I don't know if you picked trombone, but there's at some point something drew you to that, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of the same thing with moving here. It's kind of, most of my favorite musicians lived here or have lived here. So where most, like a lot of my favorite records were made. It's just, there's something about the history of this city with like jazz specifically that it wasn't even really maybe I'll move to New York one day. It was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to finish my degree and then I'm going to go to New York. It's just, that's kind of what was in my head. Mm-hmm. And now I'm doing that, which is great. It's a lot harder than I expected it to be, but it's worth it.
Yeah. How so? Why do you think it's harder than what you thought?
Well, it's like another culture shock. I went from California to Texas, which is halfway across the country, and then now the other halfway. And living in California was, you know, from 18 and younger, so I was still relying on my parents, so I didn't really have to live there. But I'm used to that. Like you drive everywhere. Things are more laid back, just more relaxed in general. Then when I was living on my own in Texas, it's like very affordable there. Super affordable, cheap rent, and like there's a lot of work to go around. There's a lot of money in Texas, more so than LA, you know, as far as like the whole economy goes. You know, people are more willing to spend money on entertainment and having live bands in Dallas than they are in Orange County. So there's just, you know, like a really good, healthy, thriving music community in Denton and Dallas, and I mean all of Texas really. And then it's also kind of laid back. You drive everywhere. You're really in control. And in New York, you're not in control at all.
Not at all.
Public transportation is constantly like making you late, you know, and which is, you know, it's like when I first moved here, I was like really worried about being early everywhere. And then I realized everybody else was late and everyone's just used to that. And that's just how it is, you know, so that's kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, it's an exhausting place. You know, everything is more expensive. Everything is harder to get to. You know, if you really don't, you know, if you're friends with people in Brooklyn, you know, and you live in Washington Heights where I do, which is the top of Manhattan, you know, it's like you really need to plan out hanging. Nothing is really spontaneous as far as just meeting people except for at shows. You know, I always see friends at various, you know, concerts and stuff. But yeah, you know, overall it's just like a very different experience. However, you know, the music here you can see any night of the week is just like you're seeing your heroes and it's just legendary people all the time. So that's totally. Kind of the yin and yang. It makes it worth it.
Right. Awesome. So let's kind of shift gears and kind of move into talking about this record and this project a little bit. Could you, from your perspective, tell us a little bit about how you and Dan and Emiliano met and how you formed a concept of a band?
Yeah. Well, Emiliano had met Dan at the Betty Carter Jazz Ahead, I think last year or 2 years ago. And Emiliano moved to New York the same, I think he moved in July, the same month I did. So he's been here for, I don't know, 7 months or so. Dan has been starting his second year of his master's this year. So he's going to finish his master's at Manhattan School of Music. So he was already here. And then he knew me, Dan knew me through, we had done the Disney All-American College Band in California a year apart. And one of my mutual friends was the the TA. It's like every year one person comes back for the following year. And since I live in Southern California, or I used to, I go back in the summer to visit my family, and I usually will end up meeting some of the people in the Disney band just because I have friends from North Texas that are in it, and we always hang when I'm back. So I met him through that, and then we had done a Disney band reunion thing. I think it was the following summer or after that, so maybe 2 summers after I did it. Yeah, I think in 2015. And then we had done some like random touring big band gigs in the South. He played in this band called the Equinox Orchestra, which is based out of Savannah, Georgia, and they were coming through Louisiana, and their normal drummer couldn't make it, so I was recommended by whoever they called in Dallas to play. So I went to Louisiana, and he happened to be on it. Dan was. So we had kind of all, Dan was sort of the mastermind behind putting this whole trio together. But he knew both of us from totally separate experiences, and we both moved here at the same time. So luckily enough, he's like, I think, he approached me saying like, there's this bass player that just moved here that I did Betty Carter with. I think you'd really enjoy playing with him. I think you guys would fit really well together. Emilio's a terrible hang and is, awful to deal with. So no, he's super, super great. So from the moment we met, it was immediately like a great hang, like really good vibes, and musically like on a similar enough page to where we got what each other was doing, but still different enough to where like I can show him some new things, he can show me some new things, like records when we're just listening and hanging out. So immediately we had like a nice friendship between the three of us, and then we started playing as a trio under Dan's name, and then eventually it evolved into all of us. Dan or Emiliano started bringing in some tunes, and then he brought in one tune in particular called Cosmoscapes. It was called Cosmoscapes number 2 at the time, and I asked him Dan's like, what's with the name? How come there's no Cosmoscapes 1? And Emiliano was like, well, it's after, I think it's one of his grandfather's paintings. So he said that eventually he wants to do, to write music to this whole series. And I was like, oh, that'd be a great idea for a recording project. We should record like a little EP. And at the time I had been recording our rehearsals in my apartment here, just with, I have like a handful of mics and an audio interface. So we were just recording like sort of demos just to like listen back to, our tunes and stuff, and maybe use them for booking at some point. And for me, just to practice recording. And
Sure.
So I was thinking like, hey, we should just, like crank out these tunes and like we'll record it in my apartment and just put like a little, dinky EP out there, like a little amateur EP. And he's like, oh, it's funny you say that we should record. I just got an email from my friend Nick Finzer. And so that's kind of when this whole project started.
Sure, yeah. So what is there any bands or musicians that you guys kind of look up to as a group? Or not, maybe look up to is the wrong word, maybe draw influence from in terms of like orchestrating trio music with no chords?
Yeah, and I think something that's interesting about that is that I think we all draw from like we all have like a shared background of music that we've all listened to and all enjoy, but we all have like some varied interests also. So, Dan is coming from, I'm not going to speak for him, but in my experience, he's coming from like a much more, more of a composer's viewpoint a lot of times versus just a saxophonist or a jazz saxophonist. He's like really well versed in his doubles. He knows classical music. He knows hymns. He knows musical theater. Like he's just a very adept musician and composer. So I think his approach is much more, it's coming from like a different place than Emiliano and I, in like I don't know, just like a more, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but he's just got, he's got that background more than Emiliano and I do, so it affects his writing.
Sure.
Emiliano is also a great writer, but I don't think he's coming at it from such like maybe like an orchestrated point of view. I feel like his stuff is more like contrapuntal, and that's kind of what I was going for also, is a little bit, because when you only have 2 mostly single note voices, Emiliano can play 2 or 3 note, chords occasionally, but can't do a whole song like that.
Sure.
So his stuff is, I don't know, it's interesting, but it's like very distinct, is I guess what the point I'm trying to make, is that they're both very distinct, but it all fits together. I think my influence is just trying to get something good down, because I'm still relatively new to writing to a group like this with no chords. So everything is much more exposed and much more contrapuntal when you're just working with 2 melodic voices, basically. So yeah, I kind of came from more of a, we already had like a lot of modern music, a lot of modern, like more modern jazz, straight eighth feels, more static harmony, stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to do something with some changes, just because, Emiliano and Dan sound really good on that, as well as doing a more modern thing. So, but yeah, I mean, groups we draw influence from. I know that before we recorded, I was checking out a lot of Fly Trio, Mark Turner, a lot of the stuff with, um, I'm blanking on his name, with, it's the, shoot, Kenny Garrett. Kenny Garrett, he has a couple sax trio records.
Yep.
And then some other stuff like with Abshai Cohen, like just trumpet trio records, just cordless stuff in general. And then also I love the Bad Plus. So
Sure.
sometimes, I mean, obviously it's with a piano, but either Ethan Iverson or Orrin Evans, but just like that kind of modern approach of, or like they're playing jazz spirited music that isn't traditional jazz. It's like coming from a lot of influences that I kind of identify with as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's great, man. So how about, could you tell us a little bit about, if somebody doesn't know who you guys are, like why should they check out your record?
They should check us out because first of all, we're going to be released on Outside In Music, which has a reputation for putting out great music. But because we're three young, hungry musicians that are doing it, there's no better thing to support than people that are going for what they want. I mean, yeah, I think it's really interesting music. I think this record in particular is a really great mix of a lot of different stuff. It's not just a straight ahead record. It's not just a spacey avant-garde thing, but it's got little bits of everything, and you can hear. I feel like you can hear, when you listen to this record, I think you can hear three hungry young musicians that are just going for it, and I think that's like important to listen to. It's not, like when you listen to like a lot of our favorite records have, Herbie when he's 20 years old on it, or Tony when he's 18 years old on it. There's something about that I think is special, even if it's not polished, even if there's certainly like some imperfections in the record that I think make it very human, and I think that's really important to listen to, more so than something that's extremely polished, just for different reasons. But yeah, I think it's going to be a great record, but just more importantly, this trio, it's like, I think our personalities come out in a cool, like we're all cool people, normal people that I think anybody would want to be friends with, like,
sure.
It's just like I think it's you should check it out, check us out, because we're putting out good music, and just trying to do our thing.
Yeah. So why don't you take a second to tell us, some of the other things that you're working on right now, other people you're playing with, and the best place for people to get in touch with you and get the record.
Okay. Yeah, I play with a guitarist in New York. He's based in Brooklyn. His name is Horace Bray. I play with him on his more like instrumental jazz fusion-y kind of stuff, and also more recently his singer-songwriter project. We just did a thing at Rockwood a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure when the next one's going to be. But playing with him, you can find him at horsebray.music on Instagram. I play occasionally with Grace Kelly, great saxophonist. She's based out of Queens, but New York. I sub for her normal drummer because he's always on tour doing really cool things. He's usually on tour with Manhattan Transfer. But yeah, I play with her occasionally. You can find her, I think, at GK Music on Instagram. And then working with Paragon, which is, Dan and Emiliano, and a bunch of other kind of random little things, as is like common in New York. It's just, you're constantly doing new things with new people, which is great. I also still have a handful of projects in Texas that I'm a part of.
Cool.
One record that's coming out soon, I think in the next couple months. And they'll be doing a tour, actually, with their new drummer in Texas, up through New York, I think in May. But it's a group called For Now. That's this singer, vocalist, composer, Isabel Crespo. She writes really, really interesting music. It's got horns and strings and all kinds of cool stuff on that album.
Nice.
I think that's at For Now Band or For Now Music on Instagram, and just all kinds of random stuff. But you can catch me. You can find me at Connor Kent on Instagram, or find me on Facebook, Connor Kent, Connor, not ER. And yeah, I hope to meet you soon.
Awesome. Well, the record is available for pre-order through May, and so we're excited to get that out pretty soon. And so thanks, Connor, for being here and chatting a little bit today, taking some time to share your life story.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. Appreciate it.
Of course. All right, man. Well, we will talk to you soon, and thanks again. So that's Connor Kent, a great drummer and great guy, a member of Paragon. Their album Kin will be out in just a few weeks. It's in pre-order now, so make sure you go and check those things out. Check out his Instagram and all the people that he mentioned at the end of the interview. Lots of cool musicians that he is playing with. And please, if you haven't already, check out the pre-order and help these guys, realize their dreams of putting out their first album, and it'll be the first of many, many, many to come for all of them, I am sure. So I'm very thankful that they were able to come to Outside In Music and make their first record. It's an honor to be able to help them out and get their music out into the world. So as always, thanks for being here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because there's new interviews, new live concerts up here on the YouTube channel, on the podcast channel, everywhere. Tell a friend about Outside In Music. Anyone that you know that loves jazz and creative music making, we're trying to get the word out. Lots of cool things are coming down the pike, so you want to be around and know when those things are happening. So subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you guys so much for being here. We're really glad you could take some time to listen and or watch, and we'll be back again soon with another interview.